All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Promise and Perils of Data Science for Development. Thank you so much for joining us in this important discussion. We'll just say a couple introductory administrative points before we jump into the presentation. First of all, if everybody could please keep their microphones on mute while panelists are speaking. If and when you have questions, please paste them into the chat. Panelists, if some of those questions are easily answerable during the conversation, please feel free to answer them there. And otherwise, we will curate them and raise them in the Q&A session at the tail end of this presentation. So if any participant wants to say their name and their affiliation into the chat, you are more than welcome. Let us begin. Yvonne, if you could advance one slide, please. All right, so this webinar is a part of Social Impact's Evidence for Impact webinar series. We have had 9 previous recordings. They're accessible at that link. We will share the PDF after the presentation. Please go and check out the other interesting evidence generation and use cases that we have presented on previously. Next slide, please. All right, so my name is Mateusz Puciłowski. I'm the Vice President of Evaluation Research and Analytics at Social Impact. And I'll give a couple introductory remarks before introducing the other panelists. So data science and machine learning have produced a very impressive array of advances in recent years. We are all aware of this. They have transformed sectors as diverse as healthcare, financial services, and the fight against climate change, which is to say nothing about the artificial intelligence applications in large language model chatbots like ChatGPT. Some prognosticators, they speak about these advances precipitating a 4th industrial revolution, an explosion of productivity, and a new era of scientific advancement. A more pessimistic interpretation, however, sees large-scale job displacement, turbocharged disinformation, misaligned AI sentience, and worse. However things turn out, one thing is clear. These tools are too powerful, the societal effects too great for international development sector to stand idly by. Data science and machine learning have the potential to significantly improve the way we design, implement, evaluate, and learn from our work. They have the potential to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of billions of dollars of programming, improving the lives of the world's most deserving and needy people. Of course, these techniques also have the potential to entrench existing biases, produce false conclusions, and create all manner of unforeseen consequences. The goal of today's conversation is to shine a spotlight on real-world applications of data science in international development today, and to discuss how USAID is engaging with and harnessing these developments for good. Next slide, please. All right, so we will have 3 presentations followed by Q&A. The first one by Dr. Jeremy Springman, who's a Senior Research Associate at UPenn's DevLab. We'll talk about application of machine learning for peace. Dr. Ben Morse at Social Impact, he's a Technical Director. We'll talk about 2 applications of data science to improve program targeting. And Dr. Stephanie Falcone, who's a triple AS Fellow and Emerging Tech Advisor at USAID's DDI Bureau. We'll talk about the USAID perspective. So thank you very much, and I'll now turn it over to Jeremy.
All right, so you see my screen? Okay, so this project, Machine Learning for Peace, has been supported by the U.S. Agency for International Development over the past 4 years. And the goal from the very beginning was to test the idea that we might be able to use some of these exciting recent advances in big data and machine learning to produce digital tools that are actually kind of useful and actionable for civic actors. So, over roughly the last 20 years, we've seen a kind of global trend of narrowing civic space. Part of the story has been governments leveraging new technologies to enhance their capacity for repression. So the hope here was that we could use big data and machine learning to level the playing field a little bit by providing publicly available tools that help civil society actors do their jobs more effectively in promoting and defending democracy in civil society. So at the beginning of this project, we started off by talking with folks within USAID's DRG Center and in missions around the world, but also with members of local and international civil society organizations to ask them, how they think data might be useful to them and help them do their jobs better. And we really kind of heard 2 consistent themes. The first was a desire for data that can be useful for increasing awareness about events that are happening very recently in the countries where these people are working. There's a lot of data out there on civil society and democracy, but most of it's produced at the annual level. So it's useful for summarizing kind of trends over years or decades, but it's not as useful for thinking about kind of what are the major things that have been happening over the past 3 or 4 months. The other thing that we consistently heard was people lamenting a feeling, kind of a collective feeling, that we're always responding to crises after they happen, rather than getting out in front of crises before they occur and kind of preparing for these things in advance. So the kind of second thing that we heard was a desire for something that can be useful for kind of strategic decision-making and planning. So we set out to develop tools that kind of can satisfy these two needs expressed by civil society. On the kind of awareness of recent events front, here we're combining mass scraping of online news with recent advances in machine learning to track events as they're happening on the ground in countries around the world. And we're making this information available through an interactive data dashboard that I'll show you a little bit more about in a minute, and you can find on our website, mlpeace.org. The second, kind of on the second theme here of predictive analytics for strategic decision making, here what we're doing is we're kind of taking that data tracking events, we're combining it with other sources of high frequency information on things like local economic conditions, and we're building forecasting models that can detect historical patterns, look at what we're seeing in recent months, and then use that to make predictions about what we're likely to see in the near future. So here we have 2 different interactive data dashboards. I'll show you one right now. This will take a second to load. But these forecasting dashboards kind of allow civil society groups to kind of look at what our forecasting models are saying about the world. So this is our civic space early warning system. It shows all the countries that we're currently producing data for. We have 50 countries up on the website right now. We'll have 56 countries up by September of 2012. But for each country, you can go in and find some kind of brief information about what we're expecting to happen in that country over the next 7 months. And you can also see some other details. So for each of these countries, we update the data every 3 months. So the data is never more than 3 months old. And at the same time, we produce a brief report summarizing what major events our data has detected since the last time we updated the data, as well as what our forecasts are saying about the future. And you can kind of link to all that directly from this dashboard. So talking quickly about the data production. So the main input here is articles scraped from more than 300 sources of online news. The vast majority of these sources are local sources based in the countries that we're producing data for. This means scraping and processing data in more than 30 different languages, and we have a repository right now of about 90 million articles that we've scraped. The main output here is monthly data covering every month from the beginning of 2012 up to roughly the present day. And we're specifically producing data tracking 20 events related to civic space and 22 events related to foreign or authoritarian influence, specifically Russian and Chinese influence on the countries that we're tracking. Talking quickly about bias, and I'll be really happy to return to any of this during the Q&A, but I think one of the innovative things that our project does is pay really kind of careful attention to these local sources that we're grabbing data from. So for every country, we have custom scrapers that ensures comprehensive capture of the full publication history of these sources. And that allows us to also kind of look at what are the specific biases of each source and to ensure that kind of we're getting a roughly equal share of information coming from independent sources compared with sources that are likely kind of state aligned or aligned with specific interests. And again, I'm kind of really happy to talk about how we do that specifically during the Q&A if anyone's interested. So if you go to our first data dashboard, which just allows you to kind of look at and interact with the data that we have, you'll see a lot of stuff like this. So this is data tracking reporting on non-lethal violence and defamation cases in India. So there's a lot of different ways to go from that repository of 90 million articles up to data tracking specific events over time. The way we choose to do it is to calculate the share of all articles that are reporting on all events in the country that are reporting specifically on the events that we're tracking. So here you're seeing of all articles reporting on India, the share of articles reporting on non-lethal violence and defamation cases. Here's another example for legal actions and protests in India. And what we've learned, both kind of through formal validation efforts, but also just through spending a lot of time digging around the data, is that when you see a jump in the share of articles reporting on a specific event, that's almost always telling you about something important that's happening on the ground. And what we can do is when we see a big jump in the share of reporting on a specific type of event, we can then dig into the underlying database that we have and identify the specific articles that are driving that spike in reporting. So these are all examples coming from India, and these are all events that were pretty widely reported on. But what we find in a lot of the countries that we're producing data for is that there are kind of major events that are detected in our data and that are really driving politics, but which are never reported on in international or English language sources. So I think this really emphasizes the need that if you want to actually understand what's happening in a country, you really need to kind of you can't really be focusing exclusively on international or English language sources. You really need the kind of non-English language sources that are based in those countries. Moving on to the forecasting. So if you go to our more detailed forecasting dashboard, you'll see a lot of forecasts that look like this. So this is a forecast of our civic space index in Indonesia. Our civic space index is just a measure that combines a number of different events into one summary score. So what it's really telling you is the amount of overall civic space activity happening month to month in each country. Here, that black line is capturing months that we already have data for. So for Indonesia, we have data up through the end of March 2023. And that dash line is capturing our predictions for the next 7 months. As you can see here, we're expecting a really big spike in civic space activity in June of 2023 for Indonesia. So that's something we'll learn pretty quickly, pretty soon, whether that was an accurate forecast or not. But so we've had the forecasting dashboard up and running for a little more than a year now, which has given us a lot of opportunity to identify specific major political events that we provided advance warning of. The list you see here is just some of the most recent ones from the last couple of months. But thinking kind of the full time period, we had 26 predictions that we've been able to evaluate the accuracy of since December of 2022. Over that period, we've had roughly a 70 to 80% success rate. So meaning, when we forecast a major event will happen in the next 7 months, 70 to 80% of the time that happens within a few months of when we predicted it to occur. And just to show you what that looks like, so this is an example of this is an example of our most recent accurate forecast just from the last data update that we did a few weeks ago. So this is a forecast for civic activism in Angola. Again, that black line is months that we had data for when we produced the forecast. The dashed line is the actual forecast that we built. Here, this was a forecast built in November using data through the end of November of 2022. Here, what we were predicting in November was a major jump in civic activism in Angola going into spring of 2023. It's kind of hard to tell from this figure, but we're actually expecting the biggest jump in reporting in civic activism that we've seen in the entire 10 years that we have data for the country. So we were expecting a really kind of major jump in activity. When we went back and updated the data a few weeks ago, we saw that this prediction bared out pretty closely. So here, updating the data, we saw the major jump in civic activism that we were expecting. It jumped as we predicted to the highest level that we've seen at any point during the 10 years that we've been tracking data for Angola. It happened 1 or 2 months before we were expecting it to occur. But I think this is kind of a testament to we're not always going to get it exactly right, but I think this is useful information that can be used for planning if we want to get out in front of things that are likely to occur. And here's just an example of some of the articles reporting on the specific events that we're driving this major increase in civic activism. There's some interesting stuff. If you're looking closely here, the word militants is actually like a mistranslation from the Portuguese of the word that's supposed to be activism, which is, I think, another kind of interesting testament to the power of these models to even deal with some of those mistranslations and still accurately classify articles in accordance to what's being reported on. So talking really quickly about some of the applications of this work, and this is also something I'd love to talk about more in the Q&A if there's time. The Machine Learning for Peace project has been part of the broader Inspires Consortium, a USAID supported consortium, which has a flexible response funds mechanism that's basically dedicated to rapidly deploy support to civil society organizations working in countries that are showing signs of closing civic space. There's a lot of information that goes into deciding which countries should be prioritized for that type of support, but the forecasting models and the results of those forecasts have been one of the things that we use to determine which countries to prioritize, and it's been really useful in that regard. Right now, we're working on developing formal partnerships with both other donors as well as with local and international civil society organizations in an attempt to kind of more directly disseminate this information down to the civic actors that we think are most well positioned to use this information in the work that they do. And we're also trying to build these digital tools into some of the decision-making processes made by donors. one thing that, I would love for, the audience to think about and to hear from the audience about later, if anyone's interested, is, thinking through how this type of event detection and forecasting information can be applied to the work that all of you are doing. Ultimately, like, we are researchers, but what we really care about is producing data that's useful for people out there in the world. So we'd love to hear feedback on that. And while you're thinking about that, keep in mind, what I've shown you is one specific application of a broader infrastructure that we've developed. So here we're using this big infrastructure to identify, to track kind of and forecast 20 specific events. But we can, reclassify this to track a lot of different types of events. So if we decide that we want to use this existing, body of work or this, existing infrastructure to track things like migration or environmental conflict or media polarization, it's relatively easy to adapt this infrastructure to try to track and forecast those types of events and issues as well. And I'm out of time, so I'll leave it there. But thanks so much. It was great. And yeah, hope you're interested in it.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. We'll be coming back to some of those points you raised in the Q&A session. Over to
All right. Well, thank you, Mateusz, and thank you, Jeremy, for those remarks. Yvonne, if you want to just proceed to the next slide, that would be great. So today I'm going to talk about the use of data science to inform and improve program targeting. And the motivation for the application of data science to program targeting is really the challenge that practitioners and policymakers face when deciding where to implement their programs. And what I'm referring to here is that last mile of service delivery, when you've already identified your region of focus, you've already identified your intervention, and it's come time to identify which specific communities you want to target with the intervention, and within communities, which specific individuals you might select as beneficiaries. The challenge here is how to prioritize communities and individuals to make your program maximally effective. And the core reason this is a challenge is that these targeting decisions need to be made at the planning phase, at the outset of programs and interventions, when you only have imperfect and incomplete information about which communities and individuals would most benefit from the program. So to cite just a few motivating examples that we'll explore more closely in the coming slides, we could consider the challenge of targeting violence prevention programs for at-risk youth. How do you identify communities with large numbers of at-risk youth? Within these communities, how do you identify those who are most at risk? If we want to make our program maximally effective, we need ways to think about this in a structured process and to answer these questions. Alternatively, to foreshadow the second example, you could consider the challenge of targeting reconciliation programming in rural Mali. How do you identify divided communities that would most benefit from reconciliation programming? And how do you do this in a way that is sensitive to past conflict experiences and adheres to do no harm principles? These are just two examples, and I'm sure members of the audience will have other examples of program targeting challenges that could potentially be informed or surmounted by data science methods. And I'd love to hear folks' thoughts and reflection on the broader applicability of the methods we'll discuss today at the end of today's presentation during the discussion period. Next slide, please. Okay, so I now want to talk about our first example, which comes from the USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Mission, and in particular, their Family Matters counseling program for at-risk youth. The challenge, as I've alluded to just a minute ago, is how to target the program towards those most at risk. Historically, the Family Matters program used a risk screen composed of more than 120 questions. It took a long time to administer, and it had a very complicated and involved scoring system that required outside expertise to perform, and therefore precluded implementation staff from deploying and using in the field. So to address these limitations in 2021, the mission commissioned Social Impact's data science team to use machine learning methods to identify which of the 120 plus questions in the existing risk screen were the strongest predictors of future delinquency among at-risk youth. We then developed and validated a shorter risk screen composed of just 25 questions with a very simple and straightforward scoring rubric. And these 25 questions were the questions that the machine learning algorithm identified as the strongest predictors of future at-risk behavior. Next slide, please. So in terms of the impact of this project, as I mentioned, the revised risk screen is shorter, it's more accurate, it has a simplified scoring rubric that implementation staff can perform themselves in the field. The risk screen itself is now publicly available for researchers and practitioners to use and adapt for their own purposes. And indeed, the tool is currently being adapted, scaled up, and deployed under the USAID YRE program, the Youth Resilience, Inclusion, and Empowerment Program in the Caribbean. So we're really excited about this use case and this application of data science methods to refine a tool and then to then later see it be adapted and deployed at scale is an exciting development for us here at the Social Impact Data Science team. Next slide, please. The second example comes from rural Mali. Here, Social Impact is working with the USAID Mali mission to evaluate the impact of a reconciliation program for historically divided communities. Once again, we're faced with the challenge of identifying communities that would be suitable for this intervention, that would benefit from this intervention in a very data scarce environment. And in particular, we're interested in identifying villages that meet three core criteria. First, and most important, is that they're safe for the implementation team and local partners to work in. Second to that is that they have some signifier of suitability for reconciliation programming, such as being inhabited by both farmers and herders who historically have clashed over land rights in this region. And lastly, we're interested in identifying villages that meet certain logistical and research criteria, such as not being too close together and not being too distant from major roads. Next slide, please. So the approach we followed essentially involved three steps. First, we collected and curated publicly available data to begin to fill the information gap that we faced. Second, we used data science methods to analyze this data and enhance its predictive power to identify a preliminary shortlist of potentially eligible communities, and I'll speak more about that method in a minute. The last step was that once we had identified a shortlist, we then verified their suitability through site visits and local expertise. We use the following data sets. We use the armed conflict location and event data set, which provides real-time information on conflict events that are occurring and geo-referenced data on that. We also use the demographic and health surveys, which are conducted every 5 to 7 years. These provide very rich information on socio-demographic characteristics, socioeconomic outcomes, and health outcomes. Lastly, we pulled information from OpenStreetMaps and the UN OCA, which again just kind of provides location of roads, location of villages, some basic census data, those types of information. I also want to point out that there is a wide variety of data that we considered but didn't use. And I mentioned this just to say that regardless of which sector you might be operating in, I think which sector within development, there's probably going to be a large number of potentially relevant data sources that you can use. And I mentioned that again to highlight the potential broad applicability of data science to inform program targeting. Next slide, please. So the core challenge that we faced was that these various data sources provided information on just a sample of the total population of villages in rural Mali. And of course, from a program targeting perspective, we were interested in considering the suitability of the entire population of villages. And so what we did was we used a method from data science called inverse distance weighting. And inverse distance weighting is an approach to data interpolation in which data from known geographic points is used to estimate values for unknown points. And so you can refer to the graphic here in the lower right-hand side of the slide. We have sample points represented in orange, and we have an unknown point represented by the question mark. And we will estimate the value for the question mark using like a weighted combination of these orange points, where points that are closest to the question mark are going to receive more weight than points that are farther away. So it's actually very simple and in my view, rather elegant method of data interpolation. So we use this and this approach to basically estimate values of socio-demographic characteristics, occupational characteristics, all of these village level variables that we are interested in to inform our program targeting. Next slide, please. Here's kind of what this looked like in practice. We had known data points from the DHS survey represented by the triangles, and we had unknown data points represented by the circles. And we were estimating this variable called prop G2. That's the proportion of it's the population size within the village of the second largest ethnic group. And so that's represented by the colors, and you can just basically see how it works. Dots that are very close to a triangle are going to look more like that triangle, that known point. After this entire process, you can proceed to the next slide. We provided, next slide, please. Yep, we provided a short list of eligible communities represented here by the numbers in red. And then we provided this to the field team to then vet through in-person site visits, as well as consultations with the commune officials and village officials. Again, confirming their safety and suitability and for the program. So a very data-rich approach, in my view, with a product that ultimately was quite helpful for our field team. Next slide, please. So a few sort of high-level takeaways and reflections. I think data science offers a lot to the field of program targeting. I think it provides a powerful set of tools, and I would be curious to hear others' thoughts on that matter as well. I guess I'd also mention that it's applicable broadly, whether your intervention is suitable for communities, whether it's an individual level intervention, whether it's a school or clinic level intervention. No matter the level that you're targeting, there's likely to be data and methods that can be used to help you make a data-informed decision about where to implement so as to make your program maximally effective. Of course, we need to be cognizant of the limitations of data. We don't want to rely exclusively on data, and we don't want to take away the local expertise and the human factor as well. So I think it's also going to be important to bring in that local expertise. In this example, we use the approach of a short list which was then vetted and verified through site visits. All right, on to Stephanie for her big picture perspective inside the agency perspective.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Falcone, and I make sure that we're got my slides on up on here, or should I project them?
We'll project them. Just give us 1 minute.
Sure, no worries. So we have to jump through a couple of hurdles this morning to get to here. So I really appreciate everybody just agility and also the invitation to come and speak. I think that the topic is very, very timely. And as we wait for the slides to come up, I'll just introduce who I am and my place in USAID. I am currently a AAAS fellow, and I'm placed within, as it was mentioned, DDI, the democracy. Oh my gosh, I'm blinking out on the democracy. I'm blinking out on our second D. Here we go. Thank you. Development, democracy, and innovation. There we go. Yeah, thanks, Laura. You can tell how fresh I am. I'm 6 months into this into this position. So within DDI, there is what is called the ITR Hub, Innovation, Technology, and Research Hub. And we're sort of a more nimble part of the agency, trying to look at, the ways that we can bring in things like machine learning and AI and other emerging technologies to the world of development. And just in general, my team, the strategy and research team, we do exactly that. We're a bunch of academics who are trying to think of what knowledge and what signals should we be looking at in thinking of the agency, not as today, but also going into the future. Like, what are the things we should be keeping track of? So that's who I am, and that's where I sit within the agency. Just going back to the specifics of today, I right before coming on here, I looked up. We're all surrounded by data all day long, and I was just doing a double check. I gave this presentation, something about similar to this, just a year and a half ago, on how much data we produce per day, or how much data we produce as a society, and the numbers have already like 50% up, of what it was last time I gave this presentation. It's in 120 zettabytes, and for those that are not familiar, that's 21 zeros after the after the one. And so, what does that mean for the countries that USAID works in? Well, like everywhere else, they're undergoing digital transformation, and as information becomes more readily available, data science and data analysis becomes one of the ways that we can leverage, right, to make decisions. At the same time, collecting personal and context-specific data, we do need to be wary and adhere to the digital principle practices that keeps our mission to create more open, accountable, and citizen responsive governance within the countries that we work in. Digitalization and digital technologies can be the link to access services, ways we interact with each other, ways we contribute or do economic activities. Apart from digital everything, how the agency sees the space is through the lens of ecosystems. And this guides our work. So today, I will get into a couple of frameworks that we use for thinking about the tools, but also the data that we collect, and then beyond the what the models or the tells us what the outcome that it spits out, let's say, how do you take that and actually implement it? So next slide, please. Just to give you a sense, I will talk about three frameworks: the principles for digital development, how it applies to our agenda of localization, and how USAID research to action approach happens. And I will give a couple of comments on challenges and opportunities. Next slide. So principles of digital development is something that we did along with other partners and sort of people in the development space. So this was not done alone, but it over decades, 2 decades, it helped codify what works and what doesn't work in digital development. The principles are a set of 9 best practices that we help develop in consultation, and they aim to guide the design, implementation, and evaluation of programs that use anything digital. So digital tools, and I think this is quite broadly defined, but we think of them as things that help us access banking via mobile accounts or e-government applications. I don't know if anybody saw the news, but the government in Ukraine was here this week and was showcasing the DIA app and the ways that they moved everything, citizens' information and government services to an app So in any case, these principles are designed to avoid some of the risks that can be introduced. Similarly, collecting data should also find these principles very, very relevant and what we do with that data as well. So I'm not going to go through all 9 of them, but you can see here, and I'm happy to provide more, but I'll just focus on 3 that I think are really pertinent. Number 1 is you have to design with the user. We're not these sort of overlords that just come in and say what you should be doing, but hopefully we're engaging the citizens or the governments or the ultimate stakeholders and users of these digital tools in that process. The principle number 4 is build for sustainability. So how do we think about this, surviving long term? Number 5 is be data driven, but I think that one is obvious for the conversation today. Perhaps not so for other digital, but certainly for the one today. And then number 9 is how to be more understand the context and the existing ecosystems in which you're working in. Next slide, please. Now moving to more on how we think of localization. The idea has been over time that we've moved a little bit more from the left-hand side, that we tended to be more consultative or inform people of what they should be doing, to involving people and helping them co-design what are the policies or programs or interventions that they want to come up with. And so an example of that would be and let me say, so we've certainly seen this progression, sort of an evolution of increasing engagement from locals, from stakeholders. This is an adaptation of actually a spectrum in which participation is measured, and we adapted it within our conversations of digital ecosystems to also include the first one. This was not part of it, which is extract, which has been actually a very common way that we work, for years. Which is show up, ask for survey, and then either come back with results, or sometimes not even that, come back 2 years later and ask for a survey again. And so thanks for answering, and see you in 5 years down the road. And so I think what we're trying to move the conversation is to engage those that are going to be using these results, or what it is that our suggestions are, and part of making or institutionalizing them and making them part of that process as well. So how do we move towards the right side of this graph? Next slide, please. And then the last kind of framework that I wanted to focus on is, you may all know that USAID really likes science and really likes evidence. And we have an entire division thinking about research. And they've put out a number of tools on how to bring research to action, and that translation, because just because we have a very neat and nice outcome to our scientific inquiries, it doesn't mean that those translate perfectly to real life and how we might apply them. And so this is a systemic process for promoting the use of evidence. As others pointed out today, how do we make better decisions based on information that we already have? And it aligns with the research to action that you see here. The agency has also created a research translation toolkit, and it's a very, you can see here, it's a very thorough process. And I just want to bring your attention to 3 items. So how to package and disseminate the evidence that you have. And so, just to go back to some of the examples that we're giving today, if you have youth delinquency and at risk, once you know who that person is, or where that what do you do with that information? Do you go and knock on their door and say, hey, you are at risk? Or do you inform the who is it that is involved in now making sense of that information? And how are you gonna talk about it, right? So these are the last three in the slide. So the second one I'll talk about is fostering the use of evidence. The process does not end with dissemination. You need to provide end users with training, with tools, with assistance and integration in ways that they can bring this into their work. And then the last one is being able to track and measure success. So as we work through these steps, it is important to follow up and ensure that there's some kind of commitment. And so it's not like we just dropped information on them and said, good luck, go on. So that I think one way that I think about it is sort of what is the finish line for a researcher often is, okay, I got the model to give me some really nice predictions. What do I do now, right? Usually publish. For us, it's like, how do we then translate that and bring that to the communities or to the right actors? And I think we should add an extra stakeholder there is what is the finish line for then those that are implementing, those who are on the ground. And I think they look different for each one of those. So those were the three frameworks that I wanted to touch on. And I think the comments that I wanted to make are more general. So, this was more of how we think about, like in the USAID lingo, what is it that the guidelines that we work within. And I think these are the three frameworks that really apply to what we talked about today. In terms of challenges and opportunities, more specifically to data science and machine learning, I think that there's an incredible amount of information that machine learning helps us glean, and possibly information that would not be humanly possible to go through. I think it was in the thousands, the number of articles that it reads, and then it provides us insights. And I think that while that is a huge opportunity, like I mentioned, we also need to be able to translate those into actions. We need to ask ourselves who we need to involve in the process. Is it ministries, secretariat, state, municipal, federal, and how they can disseminate that. So in the case of Germany, once you know that a country is at risk, right? Do you publicize that in the media? Probably not, right? So what is it that once we are informed, what is it that we do with that? And some of the challenges are, so I think that one goes directly to that. What are the levers we want to pull? Also, depending on the complexity of some of these models, you may want to know what are the drivers. I may not be able to tell why something is happening and therefore what underlying problem I'm trying to address. Just because I know that somebody is at risk doesn't mean I know how to solve that. Let me stop there and see if there's other reactions. But I think overall, I touched on all the frameworks that we wanted to, and happy to answer more specifics in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And again, thank you, Ben and Jeremy. I just wanted to kick off this conversation with a couple macro questions. There continues to be a rich discussion in the chat. Please continue to ask questions in there while we have this facilitated conversation. So first and most importantly, we heard about three very concrete data science approaches towards improving the targeting and just the general application of international development. Those are fantastic. But if we zoom out beyond those three cases and think more broadly, what do you guys think are some of the most important use cases for applying these tools in development? If you had kind of a carte blanche to implement data science in any way that you can see fit.
Is there a designated order here, or should we just?
Go for it, Jeremy.
All right, I'll jump in so that the other panelists have time to think about better responses than mine. I mean, I think we're using a little bit of the natural language processing stuff here, which I think is great. But I think there's so much what we've seen from the large language models that you mentioned at the beginning, Matos, is I think we're just beginning to understand the potential of these. And there was this. I'll try to keep this brief, but I think there was this leaked memo from Google employees not too long ago, kind of describing the performance of these kind of smaller versions of these large language models that can be run on specific laptops, and basically concluding that when these models are open source, people can tailor them for almost anything, just on their laptop, not with trillions and trillions of parameters. And I think that's kind of where there's going to be so much potential to develop kind of specific types of tools that we can use to train it on a specific body of text for legal advice in a specific country, and deploy that to people who desperately need legal advice but don't have the resources to access lawyers. I think you just think of hundreds of different applications of that type of thing that are potentially incredibly useful and could be done relatively cheaply and easily with any of these technologies when they're open source.
And Stephanie, anything to add?
Sorry, Matos, do you want to repeat the question? I think I missed it.
Absolutely. So we talked about specific use cases, but we're thinking more broadly. How can data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, these emerging tools, how could they be used to improve development effectiveness, stripping away bureaucratic, prohibitions and administrative hurdles?
Yeah. I think the one that comes to mind most often is, to Ben's presentation, is we have very limited resources and often way more projects and places to work in than we have bandwidth, and having some form of precision is really helpful. So knowing where to deploy some of those resources and also the amount that you might need. And I think that's something that perhaps we didn't before. Now, how to localize that and be much more specific about that. I think that's a different question, but I think it does help, once again, glean through enormous amount of information that as an individual we might, or as an agency, we might not be able to, and just sort of help us bring spotlights into things that we might not have seen before. So I think it definitely helps us see signals from, clear signals from what may be very noisy backgrounds.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. In interest of time, I'll ask one more large framing question before opening it up to the floor and asking some of the participant questions. And in the title of the presentation, we promised pitfalls, and pitfalls we shall provide. Let's get spicy. What do you guys think are some of the most important dangers in the application of data science to development? And I guess more operationally, is there anything that could be done to mitigate these dangers? If you can roll that into your response, that would be cherry on the cake.
I'd be happy to kick us off on this one and give the rest of the panelists more time to think. I think, to me, the biggest danger is the power of the methods is advancing potentially faster than our expertise and ability to use them. I think using these methods responsibly in a way that doesn't lead to misinformed decision-making, doesn't lead to certain biases baked in and biased decision-making, requires a very high level of expertise and knowledge of these methods and their limitations. And in particular, with an eye towards not overly relying on them, not using them to remove the human factor entirely. So the devil is very much in the details with every application, but it's going to require a high level of expertise, both on the researcher side, as well as on the practitioner side, to know how to apply those insights. The research team needs to conduct the research responsibly and then accurately communicate those results and their limitations to the practitioner. practitioner, him or herself, also needs a certain level of expertise to make their own assessments of its strengths and weaknesses, and then to bring in all of their additional considerations into the process and make a very considered use or application of the results from the data science analysis.
So I mentioned some of them in my talk already. Issues of explainability, issues of privacy. What are we exposing people to by gathering so much information from them? Sometimes with their knowledge, sometimes without. Consultation and including them. But I want to point to there is a project by MIT Media Lab called Blind Spots, and I think that gives a more comprehensive look. And so some of the ones that I did not talk on is discrimination, ways that we could create more or amplify or entrench some discriminations, abusability of data, maybe governments that get a hold of information that is very sensitive and they're not going to use it for the same reasons that we might as a development agency, and representation of data. We didn't even get to that at all, So yeah, I'm happy to share that, but I think there's a number of blind spots that we should be very aware of. Over.
Yeah, I'll jump in if there's time. I mean, I think the explainability and interpretability issues that Stephanie mentioned are just like incredibly important. And just to kind of for our forecasting models, we only use interpretable models where you can see kind of what the kind of decision-making process of the model is. And we try our best to put that information into the forecasting dashboard. Although it's we need to work on kind of communicate that information because it's difficult, but we've kind of learned the hard way how important the interpretability is, because there's been a couple of times where we have had really crazy forecasts of really implausible numbers, and every time when we go in and we look at the interpretable models and we can find what is causing this kind of forecast to go off the rails, and we can find something in the data quality or something something about the modeling process that worked before, but because of changes it doesn't work anymore. So being able to trace exactly why you're getting weird results when you get weird results is just incredibly important. It's made our models so much better. It's allowed us to fix so many things that we might not otherwise have identified. So I think that's something that I think we're learning right now, how difficult interpretability is, especially for some of these more black box models. But it is something that I think we need to pace ourselves using new tools at the pace of keep pace with kind of not using new tools before there's kind of explainability and interpretability tools that can be used to go along with them. So yeah, that would be my pitch.
Point well taken. Thank you, Jeremy. And folks, Stephanie pasted a link to the resource she alluded to earlier in the chat. A question from the room from James. So these approaches seem compelling, but how do they compare from a cost effectiveness perspective to more traditional approaches to generate and use evidence to improve development effectiveness?
I mean, well, I'll just highlight that the two program targeting applications use pre-existing data sources. And so I actually think they're quite cost effective and can, help identify beneficiaries and villages that would be most cost effective to implement in, such as villages that are proximate to roads, and in regions that are not adversely affected by conflict. So I think there's great potential, particularly in the use of secondary data, to actually improve cost effectiveness.
Jeremy, you went off mute. Do you want to chime in?
Sorry, I was responding to some of the questions in the chat, so I wasn't entirely I wasn't paying as close attention as I should have to your question. But I think it was about kind of the resource constraints and stuff. And I think there's all this concern about AI kind of displacing labor and stuff. But I think when from our perspective, there's so many ways in which we can do the same amount of work with the same amount of people, but I mean, we can do 10 times the amount of work with the same amount of people by leveraging some of these technologies. So I think, you know, text classification is just something that is incredibly powerful, that used to take, you know, human beings reading carefully, taking notes, and generating inflexible responses. Now, you know, we can use these, you know, language processing models to, you know, classify, you know, tens of millions of articles in a matter of minutes. And not only like classify them once, but if we decide we don't like something about the performance the first time, or we missed something important the first time that we want to extract, like we can now go back and reclassify the same text over and over again until we get it right. As opposed to like with human coders, when you develop one set of rules and they code everything, and if you find out it was done slightly wrong, like there's nothing you can really do. You have to live with that, or go through the whole process again. So I think the potential for cost reduction here is just tremendous.
Thank you, Jeremy. Folks, we are 1 minute until time. I just wanted to once again thank the panelists, Jeremy, Ben, Stephanie, for joining us, for in investing your time and efforts in getting the word out about these important tools, and all the participants as well. Thank you for joining, and we hope that you will continue to think about these methods and help us better leverage them to improve this world that we live in. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
It's great.
Bye-bye. Thanks.